S-1254, an act to amend the Harmful Algal Blooms and Hypoxia Research and Control Act of 1998 and for other purposes. Being enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives.
Without objection, the bill will be considered as read, and I'll recognize myself for a brief opening statement. This legislation was introduced by Senator Bill Nelson, Chairman of the Senate Science and Space Subcommittee. Harmful algal blooms are a significant problem that affects rivers, lakes, and tidal areas around the country. Known most often as red tide, harmful algae hurts local economies that are dependent on fishing, recreation, and tourism. Sometimes referred to as dead zones, hypoxia harms ecosystems and fish populations by decreasing oxygen levels in the water. Our current understanding and response to these problems is inadequate. In my home state of Texas, I might say, in representing the ranking member in our home state of Texas, red and brown tides often affect our bays and coastlines. This damages tourism, harms our fishing industry, and impacts public health. The bill before us today strengthens scientific research about these phenomena, fosters collaboration between federal agencies, states, and localities, and advances technological solutions to better understand and respond to outbreaks when they occur. And I want to compliment our counterparts in the Senate, especially Senator Nelson, for bringing this important issue to our attention. I'd also like to thank the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Posey, and Environment Subcommittee Ranking Member, Ms. Bonamici, for the bipartisan amendment that they will shortly offer. The bill before us is a good bill that incorporates input from members on both sides of the aisle. I urge my colleagues to support it, and now will recognize the ranking member, Ms. Johnson, the gentlewoman from Texas, for her opening statement on the bill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll make my opening statement pretty short and put my entire statement in the record if there's no objection. I want to commend the subcommittee ranking member, Ms. Bonamici, and Congressman Posey for working together to advance this important piece of legislation. Today, nearly every state is threatened by toxic algae, and it is clear that both factors that contribute to the development of blooms as well as solutions to control blooms vary widely by region. And while I'm very supportive of this legislation and the bipartisan amendment we're discussing next, I would be remiss if I did not note my disappointment that this bill was not considered through regular order. While some of us have worked on this topic for a number of years, more than half of the members of the committee have never participated in a hearing on harmful algal blooms. Mr. Chairman, I think it is important that we do our best to build a legislative record and engage both our subcommittees as well as the full membership of this committee before we mark up any legislation within our jurisdiction. Nevertheless, I am supportive of the legislation and the bipartisan manager's amendment, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. And we will now proceed with the only amendment listed on the roster, and the clerk will this is an amendment to be offered by Mr. Posey and Ms. Bonamici, and the clerk will report the amendment.
Amendments to S-1254 offered by Mr. Posey of Florida and Ms. Bonamici of Oregon.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read, and the gentleman from Florida is recognized to explain the amendment.
Of course, I'd like to thank you and ranking member and colleagues and the committee for working with the co-author, Ms. Bonamici, on this amendment. We saw the importance of advancing this important legislation and the important research that's funded through this program. I want to thank the majority and minority staff for working closely to make a few perfecting changes so that we can move this bipartisan legislation through the committee and to the floor. There continues to be a need for important research, and so that we can better understand, anticipate, control, and mitigate harmful algae bloom and hypoxia events. There are many factors that contribute to these harmful events: nutrient loading and light and temperature changes, to name a few. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has listed the economic impact of harmful algae blooms at close to $82 million a year for coastal communities alone. I think it's likely that the economic impact is significantly larger than that. This includes impacts to commercial fisheries, public health costs, recreational and tourism impacts, monitoring and management costs. In Florida, the Indian River Lagoon experienced an algae superbloom in 2011, with reoccurrences in 2012 and 2013. This led to a drastic loss of more than half of the seagrasses in the lagoon, which has had devastating consequences. The lagoon is an important environmental and economic asset for the Treasure Coast and the Space Coast, and spans 156 miles through several counties. This is of great interest to several members of the Florida delegation, and we've been working to address these concerns. This legislation before us will serve as one more tool in our arsenal to better understand and effectively address the underlying contributing factors to the lagoon's degradation. The Indian River Lagoon provides an overall estimated $3.5 billion in overall value and countless hours of recreational opportunity. I speak from experience as having raised a family on the lagoon. This amendment is a bipartisan effort to improve Senate Bill 1254 with revisions and clarifications that will authorize research and development activities to address harmful algae blooms and hypoxia to better understand the causes of superblooms like the ones that occurred in Florida in recent years. Importantly, our bipartisan amendment provides for better coordination so that we get the most for each research dollar, and it clarifies that the bill provides no new regulatory authority to participating agencies. By working together through better coordination, the bill will make sure the federal agencies work closely with local and state governments to avoid duplication. This will stretch research dollars even further. In an effort to follow the principles of good government and protecting taxpayer dollars, we also removed the provisions that were included in a Senate bill that would have allowed for more significant transferring of funding between agencies, but we retained the emphasis on collaborative research. Again, I appreciate the efforts of the committee in marking this up today, and Mrs. Bonamici for working with us together on this amendment. This is a step forward to improve research and development activities to address harmful algae blooms and hypoxia events throughout the country. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back to the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Posey. And again, thank you and Ms. Bonamici for offering this amendment. And the gentlewoman from Oregon, Ms. Bonamici, is recognized for her statement on the amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for holding this markup. Before I speak in support of the amendment and the legislation, I'd like to echo the comments of Ranking Member Johnson. Because of the importance of establishing a legislative record, I would have preferred to have considered this legislation through regular order. Despite that, I'm pleased that we're moving this important bill forward. I'd like to thank the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Posey, for his willingness to work with me on an amendment that makes some minor modifications to the legislation we're considering today. Authorization for the programs under the Harmful Algal Bloom Research and Control Act expired in 2010, so the passage of this reauthorization is long overdue. The rapid overproduction of algae can have devastating effects on aquatic plants and animals as well as on human health. These effects can translate into negative outcomes for coastal and Great Lakes ecosystems and communities that depend on fishing, shellfish harvesting, and tourism to sustain their economies. A conservative estimate is that harmful algal blooms cost the U.S. coastal communities at least $82 million each year. However, the impacts of harmful algal blooms are not confined to coastal communities. In fact, last year in Oregon, lakes, ponds, and reservoirs experienced harmful algal bloom events, and they were closed to protect human health for a combined total of more than 700 days. While research has helped advance our understanding of and response to harmful algal blooms, the frequency and duration of these events and subsequent hypoxic conditions are on the rise. This bill directs NOAA to develop and implement a national strategy that takes a regional approach to helping communities understand, predict, control, and mitigate harmful algal blooms and hypoxia events. It will not only improve coordination, but also assess the program's activities to ensure that we're prepared for these events and we're able to respond in an effective manner. This will become increasingly important as coastal populations increase and changes in the environment, such as warmer water temperatures, have the potential to alter the growth, toxicity, and geographic distribution of algal blooms. Senate Bill 1254 is similar to legislation passed by this committee and the House in a bipartisan manner in the 111th Congress. The stakeholder community has been calling for the reauthorization of this critical program and the continuation of the good work being undertaken by NOAA. I'm pleased that Congressman Posey and I were able to come together to advance this bill today by offering this bipartisan amendment. The amendment provides clarification and response to a number of suggestions offered by our colleagues on the Natural Resources Committee, which has joint jurisdiction over these programs. I also want to recognize Ocean Champions for their assistance in crafting this legislation. Specifically, this amendment clarifies that the bill does not establish any new programs or regulatory authority, and that research grants awarded under the program must be peer-reviewed. The amendment also ensures that state and local governments, along with other stakeholder groups, are involved in efforts to reduce harmful algal blooms and hypoxia. Because freshwater ecosystems are also susceptible to HABs, the amendment makes certain that the plan to address harmful algal blooms and hypoxia events in the Great Lakes is cost-effective and technically feasible. And finally, the amendment addresses concerns about the transfer of funds between federal agencies involved in the program's task force without congressional approval by striking the section authorizing interagency funding. This amendment is the product of discussions between the majority and the minority, and between Mr. Posey's office and my office, and I appreciate the staff for their hard work on this. It is a good bipartisan amendment that improves the bill and ensures an effective program. I urge my colleagues to support the amendment and the underlying bill. The more we fully understand when and where harmful algal blooms occur and how they respond to a changing environment, the better equipped we will be to manage these events and reduce the environmental and economic harm they cause. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ms. Bonamici. Are there any other discussion on this amendment? If not, the question is on agreeing to the amendment offered by Mr. Posey and Ms. Bonamici. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. And the Chair's opinion, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. If there are no further amendments and a reporting quorum being present, the question is on the bill S. 1254 is amended. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the bill as amended is ordered reported favorably. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table, and I move that the bill S. 1254 as amended be favorably reported to the House and the staff be authorized to make any necessary technical and conforming changes. Without objection, so ordered.